All right. Hello and welcome to the Stream Parson podcast. Although, what do you even call today's, right? I guess after it's kind of funny because a couple weeks ago I had a much more informed topic, and then from there we just kind of downgraded, right? Last week I did a whole lament on how COVID has ruined Halloween, and then now I'm just kind of oh, I'm just kind of hanging out post Halloween, you know, just hanging out on this All Saints Day. Not much else to do. I have no particular thing planned out. Not I'm doing a little bit of a script read for next week. Next week I have something more thought out, and then I have this feeling that I'll do my topic for next week, and then from there it'll just go downward like it did last month. I don't know. It's just weird to think of it that way, but I guess it's one of those things where I just do this on the side, right? So this podcast is kind of just like a whatever thing, me just talking about whatever is kind of on my mind, right? And so there's really not much, I mean, professional script writing that goes into this, right? It's not like a video essay or anything like that, right? It's just this is just kind of a place for. The podcast is more designed. This particular podcast is more designed for fostering community. Of course, I'm aware that only a couple people drop by from here and there once in a while, right? It's not a common thing to have a full room and then talk about whatever, right? It's more but even though this place is kind of meant to be more of a hangout, I do have a little bit of content for today. Just really talk about what it, what even is All Saints Day, and the fact that it's basically forgotten in most people's vernacular, and knowing their dates. Because on the one hand, there's a day for everything, right? And you only have 265 days in a year, 266 in a leap year, and then you can just kind of make whatever days, right? You have National Cat Day, National Dog Day, National Shark Day, National Shark Week, whatever, right? And then with all the different new day inventions that are made, some other long held traditions are kind of, swept under the rug and they get forgotten about it. November 1st being one of them, right? All Saints Day, right? Which, of course, that has its particular origin and its purposes, right? That why that's a thing. And I'll talk a little bit about what All Saints Day basically is for those of you who don't know what it is, and I perhaps will educate you in that department somewhat. Even though I won't go into a lot of detail, but that's fine. Like I said, this is not a highly scripted, podcast video or whatever, right? Monday hangout video. I kind of see the problem is that when you call it a podcast, you expect it to be much more thought out and well, not thought out. That's not the best word for it. I'm thinking more I guess because the last little while I just kind of do this kind of talk at you guys kind of thing, as opposed to really a podcast was designed to be just a modern version of the radio show, right? And so that's kind of I like radio shows, like the old school radio shows, and I kind of don't mind. I want to kind of do more radio show style, just narrate something, or on some weeks I'll narrate something. I might go back to reading a book or something, but do it more like a radio show style, right? And that'd be kind of fun to do. And that was the real purpose of the podcast anyway. And so I need to get more material ready for that, and I do have something next week that would be kind of neat. So, keep your eyes peeled for that. I'm just opening a juice box if you're wondering what that sound is. I have these so I go to the store. That's supposedly like your Chinese supermarket. I don't know what you guys have wherever you are, but where I live, there's a particular chain. It's called T&T, and it's like a Chinese supermarket place, and you get your peach tea juice boxes, and these things are awesome. I mean, you could buy a bunch of other things there, but this is where I got this, and I like these things. And they're like a guilty pleasure, honestly, just having like a whole bunch of these like juice boxes. And another one that they have, you might have seen me drink them on streams because I love those too, where it's like a lemon tea in like either a juice box or in a bottle. I love those things. They're like such a huge guilty pleasure for me. I like sometimes I'll go to T&T and just buy like a whole bunch of them at once, and then just like have them kind of stashed up, and then just drink through them because I don't know, they're just that good. I don't know. I really like them. The inner Asian in me, loves the green tea drinks kind of thing. The tea drinks, right? And then you add a little fruit element, and it just makes it so much better, right? Like, I don't know, I just really like that. And I mean, it's probably not that weird. Like I'm talking about my interest as if it is weird, but it's probably like I'm sure there's probably a lot of like Chinese people just be like, no, nothing weird about that, right? Because we all do it. So, but I mean, where I live in Vancouver, you can actually do that, right? Just have Chinese supermarkets around, so you can get these kind of things, and this is great. That's one reason. That's one reason why I like Vancouver so much, right? Because basically, any style of food is within your grasp, right? It's not hard to get good food here. I mean, maybe in the future one day. I mean, if it weren't for COVID and all that stuff, and people being paranoid and stuff like that, I would do this more. Maybe I'll do one someday, where I just kind of go to a particular eating plate, like particular area in my city. It's kind of unfortunate I never took this opportunity back in the summer when I should have done it, because you won't catch me doing this when it's like super cold outside. Because I mean, quote unquote, super cold. Like Vancouver never gets that cold, but in comparison to other places, like in comparison to the rest of Canada, for starters, right? Vancouver never gets that cold. But now that it's like, can you already believe it's November? It's November 1st, right? But with that being said, it's going to be getting close to winter, right? It's pretty close. Some places, it's already winter. You might as well just say it's winter, right? In November. And so, maybe in the future, Lord willing, down the road when it's like nice early like springtime or maybe closer to summer. Thinking like April, May, something like that. I'll do like a stream where I'm actually out, and I'll show you some places in Vancouver that I really like to go to, or really one place, and then show you like some food places in that area that I really like to go to. For anyone who is born in Vancouver, you would know the place I'm talking about when I say the Drive. It's like it's kind of like one of those like ethnic community places, quote unquote. Commercial Drive used to be called Little Italy. So think of it kind of like a Chinatown kind of thing, except obviously different. And so there's a lot of nice little eating places on there because obviously it's turned to more like a semi-hipster place, and it has a lot of great eats there. And I would maybe do a showcase of like some of the places I like going to on that street. in a future podcast down the road, right? Far down the road when we're like 30, like episode like 40 or something like that, when it's like springtime. Can you believe it'll be like 40 weeks by the time it's nice enough to do that? That's how. But at the same time, on the one hand, you think 40 weeks is a long time, and then you realize it's really not. But well, I guess we're already at episode 7, so it'd be like 33 weeks if it were like an episode 40. Just hypothetically speaking, right? I'm just estimating how long it would be, but when it gets nicer out, I'll do something like that. Kind of nice to do. So for today's podcast, now we're into the more official part of it, I guess. Just do a little little talk about what is All Saints Day and how is it important to our culture. Because it's a day that's easily forgotten. Excuse me, it's easily forgotten, right? Because it's obviously overshadowed by, ironically, the day, the eve of the day, right? If that makes sense, right? Because for those of you who may not know, Halloween is how do I put it? It was a more modernized word because Halloween wasn't a real word, if that makes sense. Before, like way back, as I talked about a couple weeks ago, before well after the Celts had come up with the more like Halloween as we know it, it was not really treated as if it was like a national holiday. It didn't have a name, right? I mean, many cultures have been practicing, Halloween-related things, as I talked about in that video 2 weeks ago. But there wasn't a real word for the holiday, right? Because people had different names for it and whatever, and it was more like, Day of the Dead or whatever, something more like that. But Halloween was actually a little bit after, the Celts kind of came up with a more modernized version of it, and other cultures kind of picked up this kind of idea. They attached it to, it's kind of ironic, really, where it goes back and forth. So the origin of All Saints Day is that, okay, before I jump into that. So Halloween is actually the bastardization, I guess, of the words Hallows Eve. And so the idea is that, like any day that has an eve in it, right, as its title, it would be preceding another day, and that day would be All Hallows Day. That's what you would think logically, right? If it's Hallows Eve, then next would be Hallows Day, right? But of course, that was a bastardization of what was known as All Saints Day. And All Saints Day was a day that came up with, I want to say, just before, it might be just, it's around this time period. And what makes it interesting as well, and this is why the dates get kind of mixed up, because it was roughly during the time of the Crusades, right, which is the 10th century. At least it started around the 10th century, right? And so once again, the practices were already being done of what the church did before the 10th century. So the church was, the Catholic Church was already doing this, and I kind of give it away that. And now you're probably wondering, it's like, are you Catholic? Because obviously I'm like, oh, happy All Saints Day, even though like it's something that's more associated with Catholicism than it is with like, Protestantism, right? And to answer that question, no, I'm not actually Roman Catholic or anything like that. But I still think that it's a very rich holiday and a really cool idea. So, before All Saints Day was officially named All Saints Day, the Catholic Church, roughly 7th century-ish, I want to say the mid-7th century, like mid 600s, right? So mid 7th century, something like that. The Catholic Church was trying to figure out, because of course the Catholic Church was really greatly expanding its influence at that time, right? Because even though the Catholic Church had been around since like 500 AD, they didn't have as much influence over the known world, at least Europe and North Africa. They didn't have as much influence as they did when the Catholic Church officially became the Catholic Church. Because of course, for those of you who don't really know and don't study, European history, what happened was, so the church, there was like a bunch of churches, and as Christianity started to expand in the known world, as Christianity started to expand, the churches they felt a need to find things that could unify the churches, right? To prevent the idea of like, okay, one church might preach one thing, another church might preach something totally different, and they go, whoa, 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 whoa. If it's totally different, then are they both Christians? Are these two churches Christian, right? And so you might have a church in like North Africa that understands Christianity one way, and then you might have one in like France that understands Christianity a totally different way. And the thing that they wanted to avoid was them to be like, okay, we both identify as Christian, but we actually believe two completely different things. So they tried to find ways to unify all churches and all the Christians, right? And so way back in like just after the Nicene Creed, basically. So that was like 330 ish AD. Sometime shortly after that, right? The churches had to try and figure out, okay, we have all these Christians everywhere, but we need to like have a unifying body that we're all Christians, kind of thing, right? And so the church, and this is where we have understand like Constantine and the Christian Empire kind of thing, right? That became a thing. And then the church was one massive superpower church, but then that didn't last very long. It only lasted for like just over a century. And then there was a big split between them of how they should govern themselves, right? And of course, a lot of people will use this example as like why Christianity, like they'll say, well, see, Christianity ain't so infallible like it thinks it is, right? Because they have these politics that divides the church or whatever, right? And it's still like that to this very day. And I mean, yeah, I give you a point for that, but at the same time, it's like, well, when you have a bunch of people trying to figure out how to do something, you're going to run into these problems, right? It's just the way it is, right? Like, and the problem with that, when people use that argument to discount Christianity by saying, well, it's not a divine ordinance or anything, because obviously they have human politics in it. Well, by extension, nothing is worthwhile, because everything has human politics in it, right? So what happened was the church ended up becoming two major groups, and the first one was the Byzantine Orthodox Church, which most people may refer to it as the Eastern Orthodox Church, the Byzantine Orthodox Church. And then the other one was the Roman Catholic. And they were the two main groups, right? And of course, the big division was how they operated their governance. So in the Roman Catholic Church, as you know, they obviously have the Pope, and then from the Pope they have all the archbishops and all that, right? Of course, the Eastern Orthodox Church just skipped the whole Pope step, and they don't have a Pope, but rather the Council of Archbishops, right? As opposed to having a central figure like the Pope. So there's a little bit of history of that. So there's your two groups there, right? You have your Byzantine Orthodox Church, or the Eastern Orthodox Church, and then you have the Roman Catholics. Anyway, we get a lot of traditions, more traditions from the Roman Catholic side than we do the Byzantine Orthodox Church. And so one of those traditions was the celebration of various saint legends, right? And this is where, various parts, if you look at the Catholic calendar, there would be a whole bunch of like this saint day and that saint day and this other day of this other saint, right? And basically, you hear these epic stories of these saints, heroes of the faith or whatever, right? These badasses in history, whatever, in a Christianized context. And so basically, just like now, you had a day for you had like something every day, more or less, right? And any day could be a celebration of some saint somewhere, right? And so that became a thing. But of course, the thing that the Roman Catholic Church wanted to avoid, because this already happened once with dividing the Byzantine Orthodox Church and the Roman Catholics, was that there was nothing to really unify celebrating the saints, right? And so, sure, you had your different saint days, but you had to also have a day that was for celebrating all Christians, if that makes sense, like a all Christian celebration day. That's kind of the idea that the Roman Catholics were going for. We celebrate all Christians, past and present. And so they were like, all right, what day should we use? Right? What day should we use? Well, as I've said in the attempt at a Halloween special video or stream or podcast, I talked about how, even though the Celts in the like 13th, 14th century kind of developed a lot more of what we have for the modern version of Halloween. People have been practicing those kind of practices well before that, right? And we're talking Catholic Church 700, well, just before 780, right? People were doing these kind of practices, and of course, I explained in that video about like people had their beliefs of how certain times of the year the living world and the spirit world were not, the walls between them were thin, right? And that would be October, and then there would be like late March, right? So late October, late March. And so brain fart. Okay, so I had to think there for a second. So the Catholic Church was like, all right, we have these like people doing these kind of festive things in like late October, right? And it's one of those things that like, even though, people were Christian at the time, right? Many of people still maintained a lot of their like original traditions, right? Because once again, Christianity was a missionary religion, and when we say a missionary religion, it means like people spread it out throughout other cultures, right? And so that's another thing that once again it's kind of this back and forth where like on the one hand, Christianity spreads to other cultures, but at the same time, it's not like all the cultures become homogenous all of a sudden and then like it's just the Christian culture. That's not how it is. And so Christianity had to find ways to blend into the culture at times. It's just kind of how it is, right? And you find this in like when you find this where some people, an example of this, even within the Bible, is when people have arm wrestles about like, okay, how we interpret parts of the New Testament. And the issue that came up, this is not history related. We're talking about like Bible doctrinal issues now. So people would arm wrestle about parts of the New Testament, about some things that would apparently contradict the Old Testament, which is ironic when you read those passages in the New Testament. You read of like Galatians, for example, Ephesians. These words that apparently contradict the Old Testament, even though they don't, they come from a guy who's a very strong adherent to the Jewish way, and that would be, Paul the Apostle, St. Paul, Paul of Tarsus, Saul of Tarsus, that guy, right? The Paul in the book of Acts, right? And he would say these things of like how it's okay to blend some parts of the culture you're a part of, but at the same time, you're ultimately preaching the gospel. That's kind of how Paul would approach it, right? So the famous scene is in, Acts 15, or was it Acts 17? Brain, I'm brain farting on the actual chapter, but most Christians would know what scene I'm talking about now. And it's called the Mars Hill. And basically, it was when Paul is in Athens, and he's like talking to, he's just preaching, I guess, on like, the city square kind of thing, and he's talking about like Jesus and all that stuff. And then the Greeks are like, what is this guy talking about? He's talking about some kind of foreign religion or whatever, right? And so the Greeks in the Mars Hill community, so for a little bit of context, Mars Hill was a place in Athens where it's where the people would go for, like, let's talk the hot topics, right? This is where we talk the new philosophical trends, and we talk about them and hash them out on Mars Hill. That's kind of the point of it, and people would use that as like a place to gather and talk about these things, right? What philosophies were in and which ones would not be in, right? What was hot, what was not. That was the point of Mars Hill. So Paul gets invited to Mars Hill because some Greeks, they hear, this guy talk about like, oh, some kind of foreign religion, maybe, we're not sure. And so Paul does this famous presentation and talk about how, like, I can tell that you Greeks are very religious and you have an altar to an unknown God. Well, I can tell you who that is. And he talks, he does actually the exact same passage in Colossians 1. If you actually read Acts 15 and then Colossians 1, it's more like Paul reuses this message in Colossians, basically. And he talks about how, like, well, there was this God that was unknown to man, but then God gave himself a form in the person of Jesus Christ. That was kind of the point of that, right? And of course, in Colossians 1:17, Jesus is the perfect image of God, right? And Paul was using that explanation in the Mars Hill in Acts 15. Well, another thing that's interesting about Acts 15 is that Paul uses, and this is where Paul is being smart and strategic about how he's preaching the gospel, because what he does is he doesn't reference what we would call the Bible, right? He doesn't reference like the Jewish Old Testament or anything like that, because that would be a foreign concept to the Greeks, right? Like, well, you're basically speaking an alien language to them, right? So that would be pointless. So what Paul does instead is that he refers to like some poet that they have. I can't remember which one. The Bible commentaries would tell you better. I can never remember for the life of me. I should probably look at my old notes because I probably have it somewhere. But basically, Paul refers to Greek poets to explain the gospel. Right? And so Paul's approach ultimately was that, like, well, of course, ultimately it's about Jesus Christ, but who you talk to and how you communicate with people, you have to speak their language, right? You have to speak their language, or else they'll be turned off by the message, right? And you don't want that, right? Because we have a job to do. We have a job to bring people to Christ. Well, you can't, if you're not bringing people, if it wouldn't be helpful to, scare them off, right? That's basically what Paul's getting at. And that's why, you read other passages in context in light of that story. And you think of like when Paul talks about, well, I'm a Jew to Jews, I'm a Greek to the Greeks, I am all things for all people, so that, some will be saved and accept the gospel of Christ, right? So now to get back to the historical thing we were talking about with All Saints Day, right? The Catholic Church had to figure out, okay, so how do we bring, celebrate all Christians, right? In a culture, in our various different cultures, because we're going to be all over the place, right? The Catholic Church had massive influence all over the world, right? Well, all over the known world back then. And so they were like, well, people practice their Day of the Dead rituals around the same time, right? Because most people do that in October. That's just kind of what they do, right? And so the Catholic Church was like, okay, we can actually use that, because if people are honoring the dead and, you know, fighting off the spirit world, we can make it a day about honoring the dead, and then we can make it about celebrating, you know, Christian life as well, and including past Christians, right? And honoring the dead in that sense, right? And so the Catholic Church, roughly 650 something, I can't remember the exact year, the Catholic Church came up with a day called All Saints Day, which would be the day after what we know as Halloween. And so the the purpose of it was to keep people's focus on, you know, living your life and celebrating life, right? Because one of the things, once again, you know, there's those taboos about Halloween, right? It's about like festivals about like the dead and the spirit world and ooh, right? But instead, why don't we make a day to celebrate the living, right? And so All Saints Day was about celebrating life, right? Of course, specifically, you know, celebrating Christians as people and as a community. And so a way we can translate that to today, it's about celebrating, you know, appreciating one another. Of course, you know, no duh, you should, you know, appreciate the people in your life every day, right? And, you know, to my Christian brothers and sisters out there, of course we appreciate each other every day, right? No duh. But like the point of All Saints Day was to make a specific holiday to celebrate Christians. That was the point of it. And then, of course, you know, you get all the legends and all the crazy stories, and people tell each other about, like, well, you know, this guy did this awesome thing, whatever. And of course, there's some blend of like pagan mythologies and then like Christianizing them. And there was also that element too, right? And the point of that, whether it was right or wrong, you know, people may say, well, that's a terrible thing to do. You shouldn't erase other people's pagan rituals and pagan stories and Christianize them. All right. But the point that the Catholic Church was going for, so once again, intention good, execution bad, right? That's how you can look at it. But the point of it was, once again, is to celebrate fellow Christians. That was why the Catholic Church had All Saints Day, is to celebrate fellow Christians. And so, with that said, you know, I want to put a PSA out there, if you will, you know, to my fellow Christians, you know, use November 1st as a day to like really be intentional about like celebrating each other and celebrating that, like, yeah, you know, God's been good in your life. He's been good in mine. You know, we should praise God and celebrate that with each other, right? And you know, it's one of those. Of course, once again, it's one of those things where, like, I mean, we kind of do that every Sunday when you go to church and you know, have community with your church. That's the whole point of that, right? So, I mean, of course, we do it all the time, but I mean, the point of All Saints Day is that like we can have a kind of treat it like a festival day, even though, like, once again, people are probably burnt out from Halloween, right? Which a status report, I would say this Halloween was better than last Halloween because we had two people. Oh, so technically only one visit with two kids for Halloween, which was way better than last year because last year was super sad when there was zero. This year we had like two kids, all right? And I just loaded up. I just loaded that shit up with their bags. Just like, here, take 5 of these candies, right? Like, just take this, right? And it was pretty late too when they came. So like, it was one of those funny things where, like, sorry, I'm digressing here, but I have to kind of talk about how happy I was about like Halloween this year. Because, yeah, we had like 2 kids show up at the door, right? This, like, this little boy and his older sister, I guess, right? Taking him out trick or treat. And the girl she wasn't really dressed up. She just had like a bit of makeup. She had like a little bit of like zombie makeup on. Or just like, you know, that white pasty to look like a zombie. So she had a little bit of face paint. And the boy was like in a Spider-Man outfit. So a Spider-Man and a zombie. But not Marvel zombie Spider-Man, right? So, but anyway. And then I was just like, I just threw like 5 chocolate bars in each of their bags. So like, happy Halloween, right? But you know, sure, it was only 2 kids, and it was only one door visit. But that's, you know, my neighborhood is not known. I mean, I think the problem in my neighborhood as well, unfortunately, as time passes, that like there's just too many hoodlums around here, and like people like I guess they scare away kids too, because there's like always people like lighting up fireworks and firecrackers, which is I have to tell this funny thing because I was hanging out with my buddy Baruka, or Toasty Baruka. I think it was like Saturday or something. We were just kind of hanging out, and there was noise in the background there was noise in the background coming from my end, and people were like, "Oh, what is that?" I'm like, "Oh, it's fireworks." People were like, "Huh?" I'm like, "Yeah, people do fireworks on Halloween where I live." And to a lot of the people, you know, of course on Toasty's streams, you know, all of them are basically all of them are American. I don't think any of them are Canadian actually. All of them are American, and that was a very strange concept to them. They had never like that was like news to them that like people did fireworks on Halloween. They were like, "Huh? Fireworks on Halloween?" Like, no, the only time there's fireworks is like, you know, the 4th of July. It's like, no, man. Like here, people do fireworks on Halloween, right? And you know, some hoodlums are throwing firecrackers and stuff around, right? But anyway, unfortunately, I also live in like a part of seedier part of town. Well, not exactly seedy. That's not a good way of putting it. I volunteer in the seedy part of town. That's called the. For those of you that live in Vancouver, you would know it as the Vancouver Downtown East Side, or DTES. The Downtown East Side is the seedy part of town. Well, I live in what is known as East Vancouver, which is not too far from downtown, you know, the Downtown East Side. And so, because it's not the business districts area, there's a lot more residences, right? And so, because I guess people think it's cool to like use the darkness, if you will, of resident areas, people are just constantly throwing like fireworks and firecrackers all the time, right? And so, for instance, like last night, it was just like all these fireworks and firecrackers going off. And so, unfortunately, I think that does scare away kids from like where I live in my neighborhood. That's probably why we don't get that many in general. But hey, I will take 2 kids for 2021. All right, I'll take 2 kids as opposed to like last year's pathetic show of 0. Right, but I just had to talk about that because I wouldn't say I'm burnt out from Halloween yet. But that's because I didn't do all that much for Halloween. So I would use like, you know, today to be like, you know, All Saints Day, right? Celebrating, you know, my fellow Christians. Because that's what, you know, once again, it's all about like community and stuff, right? And to recognize, you know, that we need each other, that we need each other as people, right? Halloween was about that. I mean, every holiday is about that, right? That's the whole point of having holidays, right? Is that, you know, people can band together. And obviously, obviously, you know, people should always be trying to do that. And that's why we try to make a holiday for every day, right? So people can be a community and be together, right? Because once again, you know, that's what human life is all about since the caveman days, right? The caveman days, it was all about people being in community, right? That's what made people being in community is what made civilization, right? And so, you know, All Saints Day is just another day to like be in community. Of course, it's a very Christian specific one, but you know, it serves that purpose and that function, and that's something that we all need to recognize a lot more. And you know, I've talked about this quite a bit during the Halloween video, but you know, I'll say it again. You know, like one of the things that's really sad about like today's day, you know, the day and age, is that like okay, for instance, people talk about how like okay, we have the technology for instant communication anywhere in the world, and yet so many people report being lonely, right? Because they don't get enough real connection with people. And of course, you think of stuff like social media, right? Like, do you actually have connection with like a lot of people on social media? Do you actually connect with people, right? Like, I look at my Facebook list and I have like what 500 friends, but how many of them do I actually talk to, right? That is like excluding the family members and stuff like that. But like, how many people do I actually talk to? Like, not many, right? I remember a guy even thought I was dead once because there was a time where I was like inactive for like 4 months or something, and I was working at a security job at the time too, and guys just straight up thought I was dead. He probably thought I died on duty or something like that. I mean, I've come pretty close a number of times, but he was like, "Oh, I thought you were dead." I was like, "No." Like, thanks, thanks, guy. Like, thanks for your confidence in me, right? But sorry, I'm just gonna move my microphone a bit so I can lean back and talk to you, because I think it's nicer to do this. But if I lean back too much and the microphone isn't like moved forward, then I get quieter because my mic is pretty sensitive like that. But anyway, like one of those things on like social media, right? And another thing that I see all the time, and I try to be the like guys like, hey, you ever need someone to talk to? I'm right here. And then how many people actually take up that offer, right? But people report being like, oh, they're lonely, even though like you have social media and you have like, with the power of the internet and technology, like communicating with people anywhere in the world is easy, right? For example, you just check out like when I hang out with Tosi Baruka, right? We're like just hanging out, having a grand old time, being dumbasses, right? And we live in like two very different parts of the well, not very different. He lives in like Texas, and then I live in like Vancouver, British Columbia, right? Like two very different places, culturally. But at the same time, like we can be good buddies, right? And I try to be intentional about like actually talking to people and not just like trying to make it superficial. And I know, of course, that's another thing that's like problematic in our day and age, right? It's because people, it's now, to be fair, it's not easy to be like vulnerable, right? To be very open about what you're thinking, what you're feeling, whatever. It's not easy. It's not easy. But at the same time, if you want real connection with people, you have to make that it costs you something, right? To have real community, it costs you something. And I think that's another problem too, right? Because once again, with the invulnerability of the screen, you know, a lot of people use that as an excuse to just be an asshole to someone else, right? And once again, it's that allowing our sinful nature just to kind of have free reign, as opposed to like, no, we should try and be moral people and live up to the moral obligation of being good to each other, right? And the computer screen just makes it so much harder, right? To be good to people, because it's so easy just to be bad to people and then be like, oh, I'm immune to consequences, right? Because, for instance, the other day, I think it was like a week ago or something, and I was on Tosi Baruka's stream. Definitely check it out. I could put a link later. I get so lazy with putting links of other people's channels that I always reference. But my buddy Tosi, we were talking, we were just kind of hanging out, and we keep, although I kind of wish the guys didn't do this all the time, but at the same time, it's like there's a person that we know of that we really don't like, because the guy's kind of an asshole. But once again, it's that whole like, well, he can be an asshole to people, right, on the internet, hide behind the screen, and then because you're not in actual community, because you're basically just go back to your real life and not look at other people's YouTube channels or whatever, right? You just live in your own little world. Then he doesn't have to hear a shit talk him either, right? And so, of course, I don't condone talking behind people's backs, but at the same time, you use the computer screen. It's like, well, so what if people talk behind my back? I can just shut it. I can just shut it off. Go do something in real life, be an asshole somewhere else on the internet, and then not face the consequences, right? And that really is quite destructive, right? Because I'm a big believer in like we as human beings gotta really look out for each other and take care of each other, right? And you know, you would think COVID would teach us that more so. Of course, once again, there's the whole thing about like uh, social, physical distancing and all that stuff, and oh, you can't be close to each other, whatever, right? But you know what I mean, right? Like you think that, and this was something that humanity, and this is like, I always talk about how like if you ever read any kind of fantasy story, science fiction, superhero stories, or whatever, any kind of fiction, and of course the point of fiction is to show truths about the world through exaggeration, right? And really extreme exaggerations. If you ever read like a science fiction one is a good example of this, right? Where humans, you look at us as humans and we're like, well, we're not that impressive as a species in general, right? Like we're not super strong, right? Human bodies actually kind of fragile. you know Humans aren't the smartest species, especially when you like do science fiction where you have to deal with advanced alien races or whatever stuff like that, right? Look at StarCraft, for example, right? By the way, you should check out both my Throwback Thursday StarCraft 1 that I did, like a year ago. You should definitely check those out, as well as my StarCraft 2 playthrough that I did back in like March or something like that. Or was it like basically before the summer? You guys should definitely check out my StarCraft videos, as I got 2 playlists of them. But anyway, you take a game like StarCraft, right? And the funny thing is, like, the humans shouldn't really stand a chance, realistically, right? Like you got psychic aliens with the Protoss, right? Aliens have psychic powers that have existed, and individual Protoss can live for thousands of years. They have all these superpowers. And then you have the Zerg, who are like, these masters of adaptation and evolution. And they have superhuman strength, right? And they got like giant claws and crap like that, right? Like the Zerg are super powerful. So you got like psychic power, advanced technology, Protoss, and super strong Zerg. And then you got the humans, right? Like you think, oh, there's no way the humans would survive in the Krapulu, sector. But of course they do, because the humans have a superpower, right? And what is the human superpower? And this is true of any kind of science fiction or fantasy story or whatever, right? What's the human superpower? Is that we're tenacious, right? You know, Humans are just too stubborn to die, right? And so, and how did the humans do that? Well, they band together, right? They stand as like a relatively unified front, and they amass themselves into one powerful force, and then they're able to, their tenacity with that determination to survive is what makes them survive, right? And that's every you know science fiction story in a nutshell, right? And it shows that like the humans have human beings have a superpower, right? And it's that we are super tenacious. And so but how does that happen? How do we unlock that superpower within us, right? It's all about community, family, right? There's that whole meme with like Vin Diesel, right? Family. but like but it's true though, right? And that's why it's so memeable, right? The Vin Diesel family meme is just it's so memeable, because like it's so true as well, and it really resonates with people. And I think that's something that like we've kind of lost because of like the internet age and people being more isolated. Because people can easily hide away now behind our screen of invulnerability. But the fact of the matter is, in order to have real connection with people, we have to be vulnerable, which is a high cost, right? I wouldn't expect people to be like, oh yeah, like ready to be vulnerable all the time. Like obviously that's pretty unrealistic and pretty stupid too, right? Because you have to also watch who you're being vulnerable with, right? Because I mean that's why trust is such an trust as a human virtue, right? Because trust is all about, those inner, connecting with the inner parts of someone else, right? And so that's something that I encourage you to do, is to be able to find. And I like to think, because once again, if anyone thinks they're immune to, you know if let me rephrase this better. Let me phrase this better. If people think they're above corruption, then you're just fooling yourself. So I'm not going to fool myself in that sense. But at the same time, I like to think that, I'm someone that, if you need someone to talk to, not just on the Streaming Parson podcast, or when I'm here in front of a camera. And of course, that's why I give my Discord in the description, right? Is that, I like to think anyway, that I am someone you can talk to. And, someone that, if you desire that connection, to find a friend, if you will. I like to think that I can be that person. Of course, only a fool would think that they can be, truly friends with everyone, and only a fool would think that they're incorruptible, right? And that I would never, they would make those fake promises of never backstabbing you and stuff like that. I will never make those promises, because I am not above reproach, right? I mean, I'm human just like the rest of you, but at the same time, you know, we have to be willing to at least try, even when we know that like anyone can betray us at any time. We have to be willing to be vulnerable, because otherwise, I mean, what's the alternative, right? If we're not, you can miss out a lot, right? And miss out on those important emotional connections that you need with people, which are important to living your life, right? In every sphere, right? Whether it's work, romantic and sexual intimacy, all those kind of things, right? Your personal family life, and all that, right? It requires us to really be able to be vulnerable with one another, and that's another reason to really value, each other as living people, right? As opposed to, like the contrast between Halloween and, the fear of the spirit world, and then All Saints Day, all about celebrating Christian life, right? The same kind of thing with us, in the modern era. It's about, we've passed the freaky days and the days that we can go around and scare each other. But then, of course, we go back to the real world, and if we're going to make ourselves better, every day, right? We've got to really learn how to connect with each other, and I think that's really important. And I can't be the only person who, obviously, I can't be the only person who thinks this, but I feel like that's something that's been lost. And so, with that said, I was gonna put in a little aside, and I guess I'll do it now, because I won't be able to do my next thought without doing this little aside. But like, I mentioned earlier, when I was like talking about the Roman Catholic history and whatever, you might be thinking like, oh, am I Roman Catholic? I'm like, well, no. But at the same time, I feel like something like All Saints Day is something that's been like, when people, and especially like even Protestants, moved away from the Catholic Church, that was one of the good traditions that the Catholics had that was kind of thrown, baby out with the bathwater, right? Was something like All Saints Day. Because we should always recognize that we need each other. And I mean, obviously we do that all the time, right? And every Sunday, like, in the Christian context, every Sunday is supposed to be like that, right? It's a reminder that we need each other. And so that's something that I I implore you to find those places where you can have that connection. And like I said, once again, I'm not immune to like corruption. I would never say that I am, because only an idiot would think that. But I like to believe I'm someone you can, be able to talk to and foster, that emotional need, right? Of course, once again, I'm also limited, right? So don't like everybody come, right? But like, you know what I mean? Because I think it's important that we all have people in our lives to be able to do that with, and to really call friends, right? Real friends, not just like superficially on Facebook or on social media or whatever, right? But like for us to actually have people to connect with. And so as we move into November, as we have passed Halloween, and I don't think I mentioned this in the Halloween video. One of those like funny Bible moments that like actually has a lot of commonalities with, well, it has close parallels with Halloween, because once again, Halloween is just a more darker version of all these traditions that many religions practice. But the Feast of Tabernacle, which was one of the major feasts in the Jewish calendar and one of the feasts that God demands sacrifice, animal sacrifices, the other one being Passover for the cleansing of sin, is in October. And late October, basically the late harvest, right? Which is also, Halloween is associated with the late harvest as well, because once again, and there's a lot of funny parallels with like, you find traditions in the Bible and then like stuff in Halloween people do that actually parallel each other pretty well. For instance, tithing in the Bible is about like giving a tenth. Although once again, it's the tenth specifically was more of like a temple tax to keep the Levites not starving, but to do animal sacrifices and offerings like that, right, was also to remind the people that you're not supposed to be greedy with all the harvest, right? You give part of that, one, to the community, and two, when they did sacrifices to God in the Old Testament, was the idea that like, well, God gets your best, right? You don't just like take your, for example, okay, the modern version would be like, okay, your income, right? And then when churches say like, well, we do like a tithes and offering, giving money to the church kind of thing. And of course, the practical application is that obviously the church staff have to get paid, right? It's probably why I can't get a church job, because not enough people tithe and stuff like that to pay churches. But that's besides the point. The idea was that you're not supposed to be selfish with what you've gained, right? So when like temple tradition, like in the Old Testament, or even the modern version in churches where they do the tithes and offering, you're supposed to give out of your first, what of what you've made. And the idea was, it's to remind us not to be greedy and selfish, right? You don't keep all your money and then just give God the pennies after you spent most of it, right? The idea was that you're supposed to always remember that you don't live for just you, right? Because once again, if you think about it in a lot of ways, when like, okay, for example, tithes and offerings, right? In a church context, it's like, well, churches would say 10%. Well, that's still the other 90% to you, right? So of course people say like, well, I need every penny, but that's the mindset of a hoarder and a greedy person who only thinks about themselves, right? They think, I have to use every penny for myself. And that's a dangerous way of thinking, right? Because that causes, the problem we live with today, right? Where people feel more isolated because everybody's kind of more like, only think about themselves, as opposed to like, no, we should live for each other, right? Now, of course, you can't have your own self-indulgences here and there, right? But at the same time, you don't only live for that. Those are not meant to be the forefront of your life, right? And so going back with like the temple sacrifice rituals, the people were reminded to like not be selfish, right? And so there was of course, the temple sacrifices and Halloween, even though they occur at the same time, the mindset was different, right? Because, but at the same time, it both of them can lead to the same fundamental, you know, core of human life experience, the human experience, right? And that is people being community and being accountable to each other, right? So in the case in the Old Testament of the Bible, they may not be like doing sacrifices to ward off. Well, I mean, I guess you could think about, doing the whole God Grim Reaper thing again. Yes, I get to do it again, and it's past Halloween. But anyway, you know, to sure, there's a sacrifice to stave off God's wrath, right, and not have God be the Grim Reaper, kind of thing, right? So I guess there's that similarity of warding out the spirit world and all that. But more importantly, it was about, you know, the sacrifices were about community and about well, God made the tithe as a temple tax, right, to take care of the Levites, who are one of the tribes of Israel, who had to serve as priests and therefore didn't get like land inheritance and stuff like that when the Hebrews or the Jews moved to Israel, to the land of Canaan and all that stuff, right? Go check out my Bible reading streams for more information on that. But the point was, people don't live for just themselves. We are meant to be a community, right? And that means we do have to make sacrifices for each other, right? And so, because we want to be good moral people and we need to take care of each other. And so, All Saints Day was an extension. It was just the Catholic Church's way of doing that. So the TLDR is, make every day a celebration for the people we have in our lives. I mean, obviously, you don't have to like do something ridiculous every single day and make like big loud announcements everywhere. But when you see your friends in distress, when you see people that need someone to talk to, be that person that they can talk to. Right? Even if they don't take you up on your offer, but always show that like, hey, I care about you. And I put that offer here, right? Like, I care about you. I'm someone that I like to think I can be your friend and be a real friend, right? Because that's what people in this world need, right? We need real friends. Because when we don't have that, I mean, it just spirals people down insanity, right? I mean, that's the premise of like half of animes, right? And I mean, we all make jokes about anime, the anime trope of the power of friendship, right? But no, it's true though, right? As corny as that is at times, right? But people, we as human beings, our superpower is community, and community makes us tenacious, right? And so, and you think of like all kinds of other stories. I'll use another Bible story. I talked about this in my Genesis playthrough. Definitely go check that out. Where like the Tower of Babel is a funny example of like human beings have like the superpower of being able to accomplish all kinds of stuff if they were banded together. Of course, God's like, okay, you're not listening to me though, and I want you to go all over the earth and multiply, be fruitful. You staying in one place is not what I intended, which is why God confused their language. Despite a few verses before that, if you read in the Tower of Babel story, which is Genesis 11, by the way, or Genesis 10, sorry, Genesis 10. Genesis 11 is the genealogy part. In Genesis 10, the Tower of Babel story, a few verses before God comes with his plan to confuse the people by mixing their languages, and everybody spoke a different language now. God admires the humans for their tenacity. basically. He's like, wow, like look at these guys all united building this tower. If when humans are united, they can do anything, right? They can accomplish great things. But then right after, God's like, okay, but I want you guys to go out throughout. I want you to go throughout the earth and multiply. And so, staying in this tower isn't going to help you. So that's the reason why he did that. It's interesting that God actually admires human beings for that power, right? And of course, once again, the whole thing about the day of Pentecost, and many Bible scholars, many pastors will talk about how like the reversal of the Tower of Babel, right? Where people were brought together on the day of Pentecost, right? Because it was about bringing the people together, right? And then of course, Peter has his famous sermon, which like 3,000 Christians, boom, in one day, right? Kind of thing. And it's one of those things that like we should always be mindful of, right? Because God had always created us for, community with Him as well as with each other, right? And of course, there's that weird circular thing. I should probably just like draw a diagram and then put it up for you. But basically, it's the idea that like, okay, so we love God, and then we show that we love God by loving people, and then by loving people, it it empowers us to love God more, which then we prove that we love God more by loving people more, and it just goes in this weird circle, right? And so that's the significance of All Saints Day, right? And it's just one modern interpretation of that very thing that's been part of the human experience since day one, right? And so, happy All Saints Day. And I want you guys to really consider that. So I hope you use the rest of your Saints Day to really appreciate, those around you, especially to my, Christian brothers and sisters out there. This is a day that we're supposed to celebrate each other, right? Thank God you're here, kind of thing. That's what All Saints Day is about. Anyway, that's it for that topic. Boy, howdy. It's so weird to think. I'm back in this thought. I was like, can you believe it's already November? It's like 60 days now. It's pretty, well, see, it's still like November 1st, right? So do we count November 1st as already being done? Because it's already like, 5 o'clock for me. For some of you guys, it's way later. But basically, it's like, if we were to look at like 5:08 Pacific time right now, I'm just looking at my little clock on the computer. So it's like, 7 hours till. Do we count 7 hours as a day? I don't know, right? I guess 7 hours would be someone's work day. So we'll count as a day. So in 61 days, it's gonna be the end of the year, right? It's so weird to think that, right? And we gotta do the whole ride all over again in 2022, right? And we just keep praying that like, oh God, we gotta have a better year, like, because people are just sick and tired of like everything that's going on right now, right? Oh, sorry. For those of you, you should know this by now if you've been around this channel. My cat likes to sit on my lap because, she thinks I'm like her personal heater or something. I don't know. I assume that's why the cat sleeps on your lap. It's like you're my personal heater, and especially like it's not that hot here, right? It's getting colder, but it's not super cold yet. Like I think it's like roughly like 5 to 10 degrees Celsius. In Fahrenheit terms, it's like roughly 40 something degrees. Something like that. Let's say like about 40 degrees outside right now. A little more than that. Let's say 45 degrees. I don't know my Fahrenheit Celsius conversion. Like I can't do it like mental math like super easy. I know it's like to get Fahrenheit you go you go Celsius degrees times 9 divided by 5 and then plus 32, right? So if it was 10 degrees Celsius, it would be like, let's see, you go 10 times 9 is 90, divided by 5 is, no, that can't be right. Okay, so you 10 degrees, if it's 10 degrees Celsius, then you go times 9, so that would be 90, divided by 5, which would make it 18. There you go. That's where my math was, because I'm stupid. So that's where my math screwed up. So it'd be 18 plus 32 would be 50. So it's 50. It's roughly like 40 something to 50 degrees outside Celsius, which some of you Americans might be like, holy crap, that's cold, right? Because some of you guys probably live in a place where it's like over 80 all year round, right? Southern states are probably like that. More like, it's like about 80 all year round or whatever. And I live in the quote-unquote warmer part of Canada, right? Because, of course, when you live on the coast, because of convection from the ocean, for you geography nerds out there, because of convection from the ocean, it's usually warmer in coastal areas, right? As opposed to like if you're in the mainland, like on the prairies, you live in a place like Saskatchewan, right? It's definitely colder there. I think they've already hit below zero over there. And Lordy, just the thought of that, just like I would hate to live in a place like that. Like winters like that just don't sound fun to me. I spent one winter in Edmonton, which is like, for those of you look on Canadian maps. So we have like British Columbia, which is where Vancouver is on the west part of the Canadian map. Then you go to the next province over eastward is a place called Alberta, and Edmonton is a city in this part of near somewhat middle, but I know it's more southern, but you get the idea. In the middle of Alberta, more or less, is a place called Edmonton. Spent one winter there for like co-op when I was an undergrad and university. Hated it. It was the worst. But because of that, I never complained about cold weather in Vancouver ever again. Of course, like there's a different kind of cold, right? When you live in Vancouver, right? Because a lot of people would define it as like a bone chill cold because of like the humidity, somewhat. Because of course when you're not next to the water, right? The air is a lot more drier, right? There's less moisture in the air. Once again, convection from the ocean. The air is drier in like a place like Alberta, so when it's cold, it's just cold, right? And it's cold on the outside. That's why it's easy just to bundle up, right? But in Vancouver, when it gets cold, people refer to it as like a bone chill, and it only gets worse because it rains all the time here, right? It's raining right now, as a matter of fact. Not super heavily, but it's raining. So the cold in Vancouver is only bad because of like if you get wet, and of course the moisture of the air, that can like kind of chill you on like it sends more chills like throughout your body as opposed to just being like cold air constantly rubbing against your face kind of thing, right? I know I'm not explaining that very well. I know there's some thermodynamic physicists that can explain that way better than I can, but you get the point though, right? Like, and of course, like if your clothes get wet and it's cold out, like, oh god, that's just hellish, right? So I mean, yeah, I know technically it's like colder in other places in Canada, but of course you can't underestimate how Vancouver can be pretty bad because of like cold rain and icy rain when that becomes a thing. I think icy rain is worse though in some regard, right? In compared to like 20 below zero Celsius in like a place like Saskatchewan, it's like 20 to 30 below zero, which objective number wise that's colder, but the icy rain in Vancouver is hellish. People hate it. Went down the wrong hole. Excuse me. But now that it's November, that's where this whole thing started from. It's gonna get like, we'll see how it is around here. And of course, like another thing too, just like on this channel, and I'll probably do my announcements and end the stream pretty soon. You know, I'm hoping to find something like, it's been like what, 2 months. I took this little like break on the channel. Of course, the other thing too is that like working full time now, finally, right? It gets harder to stream stuff, but I do want to start streaming games again. I do have some plans for next year, like for example, Triangle Strategies, which has its official release date in March of 2022. You can be damn sure that is I'm definitely streaming that. I just really hope Pony Canyon, the Japanese music company, doesn't put copyright claims. Like, come on, guys. Like, not for everything. Like, because that's what happened with, remember my Bravely Default 2 playthrough? Also something you should definitely check out. I do have a full playlist on the channel. But, like, I hope Pony Canyon doesn't, like, you know, interfere too much with that, right? And I can play Triangle Strategies on stream because, you know, with that game looks like it's going to be so much fun. And it looks like a game that would be great to stream, too. I think that would be, I'm definitely looking forward to doing that. So I might do something in early 2022 to build up before that, before Triangle Strategies. And then we'll see what else I do after that, right? And I want to do something, like, I think, you know, Lord willing, we're going to be doing this for another year, at least. You know, I think I'll kind of keep this format where, like, I'll play games from, like, January till, like, August, right? And then take a small break. Oh, I mean, I guess 4 months is not a small break. But you get the idea, right? Like, a couple months. Because I might come back in December. I might do something in December. You know, Christmas-related things, and have some fun in Christmas and play random games and whatever. Probably not like a actual playthrough of anything. And I mean, I still do my Throwback Thursday videos, right? So, and I've been steadily going through Heroes of Might and Magic 2. Which, yes, I did solve the problem that I ran into on Thursday. Thank you for asking. Oh lordy, that was a trial and a half, so I will tell you that much. But, that was pain. As a matter of fact, I filmed it basically just before doing this. So, it's another reason why I'm like tired today. So I was like, oh man, I haven't filmed Throwback Thursday in a while. I should film some Throwback Thursday videos. And then trying to film Throwback Thursday videos was extremely, extremely taxing mentally, because the epic battle map, oh, it's hell. It's way worse than I remember, I'll tell you that much. Oh! And then, like, you just anticipate the pain that's going to be the price of loyalty. Oh. Just thinking about it now is like, it hurts me on a spiritual level. But anyway, I'm just thinking out loud about like some future plans for the channel. Unfortunately, you know, with these podcasts, I do plan to have a guest speaker soon. Unfortunately, that won't be Taki. I kind of wish he was like, I wanted to give him the honor of like being the first guest speaker, but I don't think it's gonna happen. He's been pretty busy, so I might have somebody come up pretty soon. Not next week, but the week after. I think I want to have a guest speaker on here. I think it's about time, right? Because what are we on, like episode 7 or podcast number 7 or whatever, right? I've already been doing this for almost 2 months, so I think it's time to get like I want to have a guest speaker on here, you know, and have more like fun hangout times, right? Because I mean, that's what this channel is all about. It's like us fostering community and hanging out while I, you know, also read you the Bible and stuff, right? Because it's all about us being together, and that's important. I mean, obviously, there's, you know, being joined unto Christ is also, you know, my ultimate objective, of course, but, you know, I have to I like to believe that I have to be like a model example of that, right? So that's why I foster community as much as I do, right? But that's its own long, crazy talk down the road, probably. But with that said, let's just do a bit of housekeeping. So this week, nothing out of the ordinary. We're just having Throwback Thursday, Heroes May Magic 2, Price of Loyalty, where I figure out how to get through that problem I ran into last week. So it'll trust me, it'll be fun watching me solve that puzzle. And then Friday we have our reading stream continuing from the Book of Kings. Particularly Second Kings, starting from chapter 9. So that's the rest of this week. That's the rest of this week. So nothing else to really say. This is going to be the end of the stream. I hope you guys enjoyed hanging out with me on this All Saints Day, talking about what it's all about, you know. And I hope that you have a great rest of your All Saints Day. And I'll see you guys Thursday for Throwback Thursday Heroes of Might Magic 2 action. So I hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and God bless you.